The King James Version of the Bible is a staple of many common Christadelphian homes and ecclesias, but where did it come from, and why is it so widely used by many Christadelphians everywhere? On March 24, 1603, James Charles Stuart was the King of England. Around this time, there was demand to create a new translation of the Bible, as the Bible was corrupted by the Roman Catholic Church. This was not the only accusation against the Roman Catholic Church. This leads into a new subject, Protestantism. Protestantism is a movement that began in Northern Europe throughout the 16th century in reaction to medieval Roman Catholic doctrine and practices. Protestantism is the second largest form of Christianity. Nearly 40% of Christians are Protestants. They reject sacraments and papal supremacy. James himself was asked by a conference of churchmen to revise the English Bible because the current translations were corrupt and not answerable to the truth of the original. The current authorized English translations at the time were the Great Bible, the Bishop's Bible, and the Geneva Bible. John Wycliffe and his followers were the first to translate the Bible into English in the 14th century. Certain parts of the Bible had been translated before, but Wycliffe's work was complete. The earlier partial translations can be traced back to the 7th century. It is impossible to say which parts of Wycliffe's translation were written by himself. Wycliffe was an English philosopher, theologian, and Bible translator, reformer, English priest, and a professor at the University of Oxford. His followers were known as Lollards. Wycliffe rightfully believed that the Bible was the only authoritative and reliable place to find the truth of God. His translation was based on the Vulgate. Wycliffe is believed to be responsible for the New Testament, while his friend Nicholas of Hereford was responsible for the Old Testament. Generally, Wycliffe's translation of the Newer Testament was deemed of better quality. The whole of it was later revised by John Purvey in 1388. In 1384, Wycliffe had suffered a stroke at the age of 74. In 1409, his translation was banned because of the association with the Lollards. To circumvent this, the book was often printed with a date before 1409. On May 4th, 1415, Wycliffe was declared a heretic, banning his writings. His work was ordered to be burned as well as his bodily remains. Wycliffe's corpse was burned and his ashes were thrown into the River Swift, which flows through the town of Lutterworth. William Tyndale's New Testament Bible was the first printed English Bible. After these, he decided to attempt a translation of the Old Testament. Tyndale was able to complete the first 14 books of the Old Testament. Tyndale's Bible was criticized for having notes that were unacceptable to English churchmen. Tyndale was executed alive this time, unlike Wycliffe, who had only his dead corpse burned. He was charged with heresy because he translated the Bible. Despite his execution and charges as a martyr, his translation became the basis of future Bible translations in early modern English. His works were slightly edited by Miles Coverdale. Miles Coverdale is mostly responsible for the Great Bible. He borrowed a lot from Tyndale's translation. Miles Coverdale adapted and made small modifications to the translation by Tyndale, mainly removing sections considered objectionable to the bishops. Coverdale based his translation on Tyndale's New Testament and incomplete Old Testament translations. Coverdale's Bible was the first Bible to be authorized, and it was authorized by the Church of England. The Geneva Bible was made in 1560. The Geneva Bible was a revision of Tyndale's Bible and the Great Bible. In 1558, however, people began to realize the flaws in the Geneva Bible and the Great Bible. This leads to the Church of England to create the Bishop's Bible. The Bishop's Bible was a revision of the Great Bible and somewhat referencing the Geneva Bible. This Bible was officially approved, but did not get as popular as the Geneva translation because of its price and size. Lay people typically just read the Geneva translation. You could easily buy a small Geneva Bible, however, it would be much harder to get a small Bishop's Bible. It didn't help that the Douay-Rheims New Testament of 1582 was being imported, which claims to represent the text of the Latin Vulgate. In May 1601, King James VI of Scotland attended the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, St. Columba's Church. Here, proposals were put forward for a new translation of the Bible into English. Just 2 years later, he became the King of England as James I. As there were perceived problems with earlier translations mentioned, a new translation was requested. Some of the problems were identified in Galatians with Greek word translations. Some of the aforementioned versions were completely wrong or appeared to read too in between the lines. As such, King James instructed the translators, of which there were 47, to limit any influence on new translation, specifically citing unnecessary marginal notes. Word translations were also stressed. Most importantly was stripping of influence, insomuch that even Puritan influence was to be limited. King James allowed a pre-approved list if the translators needed to consult other translations. These were Tyndale's Bible, which was heavily used, the Coverdale Bible, Matthew's Bible, the Great Bible, and the Geneva Bible. Proper names, for instance, were retained from these. Rules were developed over time. For instance, words that are added to complete the meaning, they were to be written in a different typeface. You may notice that words in your King James Version Bible may be italicized. All of the scholars appointed were members of the Church of England. All of them were clergy except for Sir Henry Savile. They worked in 6 committees. 2 of them were based in the University of Oxford, 2 of them in the University of Cambridge, and 2 of them in Westminster. They were not paid directly for their work. However, King James wrote letters to bishops asking them to give their translators well-paid jobs as they became available. On the 22nd of July, 1604, King James sent a letter to Archbishop Bancroft asking him to contract all English churchmen requesting donations. Here is the letter. The first committee to finish was the Apocrypha Committee, which was included at that time. All committees were finished by 1608. A committee met at Stationers' Hall to review the text from each of the 6 committees. At this time, King James's Bible was known as the Authorized Version. This was also a generic name given to authorized versions of the time. However, some translations at the time had a name they were known for. Robert Baker was the king's printer, and he published this translation in 1611. It was sold loose leaf for 10 shillings, or bound for 12. Unfortunately, it is impossible to determine the present value of this. Online converters, for instance, will give you strange and/or different answers, but it was a rather good sum of money. Unfortunately, Baker ran into heavy debt while printing this authorized version and had to sublease to 2 rivals. Drama shortly followed those 2. The 2 universities of Oxford and Cambridge were able to attain licenses to print the Bible. 2 editions of the whole Bible were produced in 1611. They can actually be distinguished by Ruth 3 verse 15. The first edition reads, "He went into the city," and the second one reads, "She went into the city." Thus they are known as the He and She Bibles. It is interesting to note that there were no illustrations in the King James Authorized Version. It did make use of historiated histograms, the big fancy picture letters for books and chapters. You may notice that some of the letters appear to be messed up, U's looking like V's, etc. This is due to the printers at the time, and early English rules that were not yet established. Words that were not in the original, as mentioned before, were written in Roman type. It was, however, much more inconsistent than the modern King James Version Bibles today. It was changed to italics in the 17th century, meant to de-emphasize the words. The Authorized Version was meant to replace the Bishop's Bible as the official version for readings in the Church of England. However, no record of authorizations exists because the records for the years 1600 to 1613 were destroyed with fire. Not everyone was so quick to pick up the newly authorized version, though. In Scotland, the Geneva Bible had been the standard Bible for a very long time. It wasn't until 1633 that the Scottish version of the Authorized Version was printed. However, official policy favored the Authorized Version. The Authorized Version took a little while to gain the general public's acceptance. Eventually, the Authorized Version became the only current version circulating among English-speaking people. Because of the printing privilege disputes, printings of the King James versions became less careful, introducing about 1,500 misprints. Two Cambridge editions of 1629 and 1638 attempted to restore the proper text, with over 200 revisions. By the first half of the 18th century, the Authorized Version was widely embraced and unchallenged by the Protestant churches. In the mid-18th century, there were many misprints, leading the University of Oxford and Cambridge to produce an updated standard text. The first was Cambridge's edition of the 1760s, reprinted without change in 1762. This text was superseded by Oxford's 1769 edition. The Oxford edition remains vastly unchanged in modern King James Version Bibles today. The now improper typing practices and misprints have been mostly removed. Although the King James Version Bible isn't perfect, some very talented scholars and editors have relentlessly went through it, making sure that it is as close to the original as possible, making it easier to do better Bible study. Overall, not too much of great significance has changed, other than the consistency in printing, misprints, and removal of deprecated language structures. Standardizing punctuation and spelling was described as a mammoth task, making thousands of minor changes. It was checked, checked again, and then checked a lot more times for words not in the original. The non-original words were italicized. The result was a Bible that is suitable for Bible study, without the influence of the Roman Catholic Church. Since then, more recent translations have come along, such as the RSV, but you will find that with every new translation, something maybe small has been changed. This can mislead the reader and introduce biases from versions not made with the same quality or care that the King James and his translators put into the King James Version of the Bible.